Elara didn't know that the man watching her from the shadows was the Alpha King. She didn't know that his golden eyes had been tracking her every movement for the past 3 nights. And she certainly didn't know that the moment those eyes found her, scrubbing blood from the palace floors at midnight, her entire world had shifted on its axis. The stone was cold against her knees, biting through the thin fabric of her servant's dress. Her hands moved mechanically across the marble, the brush worn smooth from years of use. Blood was always harder to clean than wine or mud. Blood had a way of seeping deep, staining everything it touched, just like the blood that had pooled beneath her father's body 5 years ago. Ilara's breath caught, and she forced the memory away. Memories were dangerous. They made her hands shake, made her vulnerable, made her remember that she had once been Lady Elara Thornwick instead of simply Elara, the servant girl who cleaned what others destroyed. Her family had been accused of treason, falsely, but accusations were enough when Lord Cassius wanted their lands. The execution had been swift, the sale of their remaining assets swifter still, and Elara, barely 18 and suddenly alone in the world, had been sold to the palace to pay her family's supposed debts. "Work until you die," the steward had told her that first day. "That's the only way you'll ever be free." 5 years later, she was still working, still dying, piece by piece. The sound of footsteps made her freeze. Heavy boots on marble, moving with the kind of confidence that belonged to someone who owned everything he walked on. Elara didn't look up. Looking up was dangerous. Eye contact invited questions, conversation, attention, and attention was the last thing she could afford. The footsteps stopped. Elara kept scrubbing, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Go away," she prayed silently. "Please just go away." "What's your name?" The voice was deep, rough around the edges like aged whiskey. It wrapped around her like heat, and something in her chest pulled tight. Dangerous. Everything about that voice screamed dangerous. "Elara," she whispered, not lifting her eyes from the floor. "I'm sorry if I disturbed you, my lord. I'll finish quickly and—" "Look at me." The command was soft but absolute. Ilara's hands stilled on the brush. She had learned long ago that disobeying direct orders only made things worse. Slowly, reluctantly, she raised her head. The man standing above her was not what she expected. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it. But it was his eyes that stole her breath. Golden, not brown or hazel, but pure, molten gold, like sunlight trapped in amber. Beautiful and terrible and completely focused on her face. The moment their eyes met, the world exploded. Heat shot through her, starting at her chest and radiating outward until even her fingertips tingled. It felt like lightning, like fire, like every nerve in her body suddenly coming alive after years of numbness. The sensation was so overwhelming she gasped, dropping the brush with a clatter that echoed through the empty corridor. The man's pupils dilated, his nostrils flaring slightly. "Gods!" he breathed, and the words sounded like a prayer. Elara scrambled backward, panic flooding her system. Whatever had just happened, whatever that feeling was, it couldn't be good. Nothing good ever happened to her. She pressed her back against the wall, making herself as small as possible. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm sorry, I don't know what that was. Please don't hurt me. I didn't mean to." "You're mine." The words hit her like a physical blow. Elara stared up at him, confusion and terror warring in her chest. What?" He stepped closer, and she could see the exact moment recognition dawned in those impossible eyes. His expression shifted from wonder to something fierce and possessive that made her want to run. "You're my mate," he said, and his voice held the kind of certainty that moved mountains. Elara shook her head frantically. "No, no, you're mistaken. I'm nobody. I'm nothing. I'm just a servant. I don't even—" "You exist to me," he interrupted, extending one large hand toward her. "That's all that matters." She stared at that outstretched hand like it might bite her. This had to be some kind of cruel joke. Men like this didn't notice girls like her, let alone claim them. She was broken, used, worthless. She had been told so every day for 5 years. "Please," she whispered, pressing herself harder against the wall. "I can't. Whatever you think I am, I'm not. I'm nothing. I don't even exist." Something painful flashed across his features. He crouched down slowly, bringing himself closer to her eye level, his hand still extended between them. "You exist to me," he repeated, softer this time. "You exist, and you're mine, and I've been looking for you my entire life without even knowing it." The golden thread she could feel humming between them pulled tighter, and Ilara's entire world narrowed to the space between his fingers and her fear. She was staring at the hand of the Alpha King, and somehow, impossibly, he was staring back. The guest chamber was too beautiful for someone like her. Ilara stood in the doorway, clutching the simple bag that held her only possessions, staring at luxury she had no right to touch. Silk curtains the colour of deep wine hung from tall windows. A 4-poster bed dominated the centre of the room, draped in fabrics that cost more than she had seen in 5 years of servitude. A fire crackled in the marble fireplace, casting dancing shadows across walls lined with books and artwork. "I don't belong here," she whispered, taking a step backward. "This is wrong. They'll punish me when they find out." "No one will punish you." The Alpha King's voice came from behind her, patient and steady. "This is your room now." Ilara spun around, pressing herself against the doorframe. In the candlelight he looked even more impossibly handsome than he had in the corridor. But it was the gentleness in those golden eyes that terrified her most. Kindness was a luxury she couldn't afford to believe in. "I should be in the servants' quarters," she said, her voice barely audible. "I sleep on a cot in the kitchens. I can't." "You can." He moved closer but slowly, like she was a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. "You're not a servant any more, Ilara. You're my mate." The word sent another shock of heat through her, that same golden thread from before pulling tight in her chest. She shook her head frantically. "You don't understand. I can't be what you need. I'm broken. I'm used goods. I'm nothing." Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "Don't say that. It's true." The words tumbled out like a confession. "I was sold here after my family was executed for treason. I've spent 5 years scrubbing floors and emptying chamber pots. I flinch when people raise their voices. I sleep in corners because beds feel too exposed. I'm not mate material for anyone, let alone—" She gestured helplessly at him. "Let alone you." "What's my name?" he asked quietly. The question caught her off guard. What?" "My name. Do you know it?" Ilara stared at him, confusion replacing some of her panic. "You're the Alpha King." "My name is Rain," he said, taking another careful step closer. "Rain Blackthorn, and you're right, I am the Alpha King. I rule over 12 territories and command the loyalty of every pack in the realm. I could have any woman I wanted with a single word." Each statement felt like a blow. Ilara closed her eyes, waiting for the inevitable rejection. "And I don't want any of them," he continued, his voice soft as silk. "I want you, broken pieces and all." Her eyes snapped open. "Why?" "Because you're mine," he said simply. "Because the moment I saw you, something in my chest that had been empty my entire life suddenly felt full. Because when you looked at me, I knew I would spend eternity making sure no one ever hurt you again." Ilara's breath caught. "You don't know me." "Then tell me." Rain gestured toward 2 chairs by the fireplace. "Have dinner with me. Let me know you." "I can't eat with you," she said, panic rising again. "I'm supposed to serve the food, not eat it." "You're supposed to eat it," he corrected gently. "You're supposed to sit in that chair and let me take care of you. Can you try? For me?" The pleas in his voice undid her. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Ilara found herself nodding. The next hour was the strangest of her life. Rain had food brought up. Simple fare, he said, though it was finer than anything she'd tasted since childhood. He filled her plate, poured her wine, and made gentle conversation while she picked at her food with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "You don't have to be afraid," he said, after she jumped at the sound of his chair scraping against the floor. "I know," she lied. "No, you don't." His smile was sad. "But someday you will." "What if I can't?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "What if I can't be what you need? What if I'm too broken to fix?" Rain set down his wineglass and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Do you want to know a secret?" Ilara nodded despite herself. "I've been alone my entire life," he said quietly. "Not just without a mate, but truly alone. I've had advisors and servants and soldiers who would die for me, but never anyone who saw me as just Rain, never anyone who made me feel like I was more than just a crown and a title." "You're the Alpha King," she whispered. "Everyone wants you." "Everyone wants what I represent," he corrected. "The power, the status, the protection. But you, when you looked at me tonight, you weren't seeing the king, you were seeing the man, and you were terrified of both." "I don't understand." "You saw me," he said simply. "Not what I could give you or do for you, but me. That's all I've ever wanted. Someone who could see me and choose to stay anyway." Ilara stared at him, something shifting in her chest. "I don't know how to choose to stay. I only know how to survive." "Then we'll start there," Rain said. "We'll start with surviving, and maybe someday you'll want more than that." He stood slowly, and Ilara tensed, but he only moved to the fireplace, giving her space. "I should tell you," he said, his back to her, "I'm not planning to touch you or claim you or do anything that would make you uncomfortable. I know what that golden thread between us means, but I also know you need time." "How much time?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Rain turned to face her, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. It was patient and fierce and utterly certain. "However long you need," he said. "A week, a month, a year. Forever, if that's what it takes." "And if what if I can't ever?" "Then I'll wait forever," he said simply. "I've waited 34 years to find you, Ilara. I can wait however much longer you need." For the first time since he'd found her in that corridor, Ilara took a voluntary step toward him. Just one small step, but the way his eyes lit up made it feel like she crossed an ocean. "I don't understand why," she whispered. "Because broken pieces can be beautiful too," Rain said softly. "Because you're not nothing, you're everything. And because when you're ready, when you decide you want to try to trust me, I'll be right here." Something warm and dangerous bloomed in her chest. It felt like hope, and hope was the most terrifying thing of all. But for the first time in 5 years, Ilara didn't want to run from it. 3 weeks later, Ilara laughed for the first time in 5 years. It started as a soft giggle when Rain told her about his disastrous attempt at cooking breakfast, which had ended with smoke billowing through the royal kitchens and 3 servants rushing in with buckets of water. But then the sound grew, bubbling up from somewhere deep in her chest until she was doubled over, tears streaming down her face. Rain watched her with such wonder that it made her heart skip. "I haven't heard that sound since I was 13, she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Then I'll have to work harder to make you laugh more often," he murmured, and the promise in his voice made that golden thread in her chest pull tight with warmth. The past 3 weeks had been like living in a dream. Rain visited her every morning, bringing breakfast and gentle conversation. He never stayed longer than an hour, never pushed for more than she could give, never made her feel like she owed him anything. He was patient in a way that defied everything she understood about powerful men. But the court whispers were growing louder. "The king has lost his mind over a servant girl," Lady Morwyn had hissed to her companion as Ilara passed in the corridor that morning. "It's unseemly, disgusting." She's cast some sort of spell on him, another voice had agreed. There's no other explanation. Ilara had pressed herself against the wall, invisible as always, and listened to them tear apart the one good thing that had ever happened to her. But now, sitting in the garden with rain as the afternoon sun warmed her face, those whispers felt like they belonged to someone else's life. "You're thinking too hard," Rain observed, settling beside her on the stone bench. "I can practically hear your thoughts churning." "Just court gossip," Ilara said, trying to keep her voice light. "Nothing important." Rain's jaw tightened. "What are they saying?" "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me." His voice carried that edge of command that reminded her exactly who she was talking to. "Tell me." Ilara sighed, plucking at the fabric of her new dress, silk the colour of midnight, a gift from Rain that still felt too fine for her skin. "They think I've enchanted you, that there's no other reason you would notice someone like me." "And what do you think?" The question caught her off guard. Ilara looked up at him, studying the sharp planes of his face, the way the sunlight caught the gold in his eyes. He was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache, powerful beyond measure, and for some inexplicable reason, he wanted her. "I think they're probably right," she said quietly. Rain's hand covered hers so gently she almost didn't feel it. "They're not." "How can you be sure?" "Because I've been waiting for you my entire life without knowing it," he said simply. "Because when I touch you, everything else fades away. Because when you smile, I understand what happiness feels like." Heat crept up Ilara's neck. 3 weeks of careful courtship, and he could still make her blush with a few simple words. "Rain." "Your Majesty." The cold voice cut through their moment like a blade. Ilara spun around to see a tall man approaching across the garden, his silver hair gleaming in the sunlight, and his pale eyes fixed on her with undisguised disgust. Every drop of blood in Ilara's body turned to ice. Lord Cassius Ravencrest, the man who had destroyed her family, the man who had orchestrated her father's execution and her sale into slavery, the man she prayed every night she would never see again. "Lord Cassius," Rain said, his voice carefully neutral as he stood, "I wasn't expecting you at court." "I came as soon as I heard the interesting rumours." Cassius's gaze slithered over Ilara like something unclean. "About your new companion." Ilara couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at the man who had taken everything from her and pray he didn't recognize the terrified girl cowering behind his stolen lands. But she saw the moment recognition dawned in his pale eyes. His lips curved into a smile that made her stomach turn. "How fascinating," Cassius murmured. "She looks remarkably like someone I used to know, someone who died 5 years ago." "Ilara?" Rain's voice seemed to come from very far away. "What's wrong?" She was drowning. The garden spun around her, the scent of roses turning cloying and sick. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to press them against her thighs to make them stop. "I have to go," she whispered, lurching to her feet. "Ilara, wait!" But she was already running. She made it to her chamber before the panic attack hit in full force. Her lungs refused to work, her vision blurred, and she collapsed against the door with a sob that tore from her throat like a physical thing. He'd found her. After 5 years of hiding, of being invisible, of praying every night that she could disappear completely, Lord Cassius had found her. And now he would destroy her all over again. "Ilara!" Rain's voice came through the door, gentle but worried. "Can I come in?" "No," she gasped, pressing her back harder against the wood. "No, you can't. I have to pack. I have to leave." "You're not going anywhere." "You don't understand." The words came out broken, desperate. "He knows who I am. He'll tell you what I really am, and then Then I'll what?" "You'll realize I'm everything they said I was. A traitor's daughter, worthless, nothing." The door handle turned, but she was pressed against it and it couldn't open. There was a long moment of silence. "My father was a drunk who beat my mother until she stopped speaking entirely," Rain said quietly through the wood. My grandfather conquered 3 territories through torture and genocide. My bloodline is built on violence and pain. Are you going to run from me too?" Ilara's breath hitched. "That's different." "No, it's not." His voice was closer now, like he was sitting against the door just as she was. "We don't get to choose our families, Ilara. We only get to choose who we become." "But Lord Cassius will tell everyone. He'll have me arrested. He'll have to go through me first," Rain said, and his voice carried the full weight of his authority. "And I promise you, love, that's not going to happen." The endearment hit her like a physical blow. Love. He'd called her love, and she was about to lose him to the sins of her father's name. "I should have told you," she whispered. "I should have told you what I was from the beginning." "What you were doesn't matter. What you are is mine." "I'm scared," she admitted, the words barely audible. There was a soft thud against the door, like he'd pressed his forehead against it. "Then we go slow," Rain said softly. "We go slow, and I stay right here, and we face whatever comes together." "You don't understand what you're saying. When people find out who I really am—" "Then they'll learn that I don't care," he interrupted. "They'll learn that you're under my protection, and anyone who threatens you threatens me." Ilara closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to believe him. Gods, she wanted to believe him so badly it felt like dying. "I don't want to lose this," she whispered. "I don't want to lose you." "You won't," Rain promised, and something in his voice made her believe it might be true. "I'm not going anywhere, Ilara. I'm not leaving." For the first time since seeing Cassius's face, Ilara felt like she could breathe, but she knew the worst was yet to come. The great hall had never felt so much like a courtroom. Ilara stood beside Rain's throne, her hands trembling despite the reassuring weight of his fingers intertwined with hers. The entire court had assembled for what Lord Cassius had called a matter of urgent importance to the crown. Every noble, every adviser, every person of influence packed the massive chamber until the air grew thick with tension and whispered speculation. "I should leave," Ilara whispered for the 100th time that morning. "I should disappear before he destroys you too." "We face this together," Rain said quietly, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. "I'm not hiding you anymore." "But if they call for my arrest—" "They won't." His voice carried absolute certainty, but Ilara could see the tension in the line of his shoulders, the way his free hand rested on the arm of his throne, like he was ready to fight. Lord Cassius entered the hall with theatrical precision, his silver hair gleaming and his pale eyes scanning the crowd until they found Ilara. His smile was cold as winter. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing with perfect courtesy. "Thank you for agreeing to hear this matter publicly. I know how much you value justice and truth." "Get on with it, Cassius," Rain said, his voice flat. "You called this assembly. State your business." "Gladly." Cassius turned to face the assembled court, his voice carrying easily through the vast space. "I stand before you today to expose a deception that threatens the very foundation of our realm, a lie that has been perpetrated against our king." A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Ilara's grip on Rain's hand tightened until her knuckles went white. "The woman standing beside our king," Cassius continued, "is not who she claims to be. She is not some innocent servant girl who caught his eye through chance. She is Lady Ilara Thornwick, daughter of the traitor Lord Marcus Thornwick, who was executed 5 years ago for plotting against the crown." The hall erupted in shocked gasps and angry voices. Ilara felt the blood drain from her face as hundreds of eyes turned to stare at her with horror and disgust. "She has deceived our king," Cassius shouted over the noise, "hidden her true identity to worm her way into his bed and his heart. She is the spawn of a traitor, and by law she should have been executed alongside her father." "Enough." Rain's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, silencing the entire hall in an instant. He stood slowly, and Ilara felt the full weight of his power radiating outward like a physical force. "Lord Cassius," he said, his voice deadly calm, You stand in my hall before my court and accuse my mate of deception. I speak only the truth, your majesty. Surely you cannot mean to— She told me who she was 3 weeks ago, Rain said simply. The hall fell so silent Ilara could hear her own heartbeat. What? Cassius's composure cracked slightly. Every detail of her past, her father's execution, her sale into servitude, her years as a servant in my own palace. Rain's smile was sharp as a wolf's. Did you think I wouldn't investigate the woman I intended to make my queen? Ilara stared up at him, shock stealing her breath. You knew? I've known since the second night, he said gently, before turning back to face Cassius. What I didn't know was why you were so eager to see her dead. She's a traitor's daughter. She was 13 years old when her father was executed, Rain interrupted, his voice growing dangerous, hardly old enough to plot against anyone. Blood will tell, Cassius snarled. She cannot be trusted. You're right, Rain agreed, and Ilara's heart shattered. Blood will tell, which is why I had my investigators look into the evidence against Lord Thornwick. He gestured, and Captain Aldrich stepped forward, carrying a leather satchel. Fascinating what my men discovered, Rain continued conversationally. Forged documents bearing Lord Thornwick's seal, witnesses who were paid handsomely for their testimony. A conspiracy that led directly back to one man who benefited enormously from the Thornwick lands. Cassius had gone pale. You have no proof. I have sworn statements from 3 of your men, Rain said coldly, including detailed accounts of how you forged the treason charges and murdered the witnesses who could have cleared Lord Thornwick's name. The hall erupted again, but this time the angry voices were directed at Cassius. Ilara felt like she was drowning in the noise, in the revelation, in the impossible reality that Rain had known all along and still chosen her. The real traitor, Rain said, his voice carrying over the chaos, stands before us now. Lord Cassius Ravencrest, you are under arrest for treason, murder, and conspiracy against the crown. You cannot prove— I can, and I have. Rain's smile was terrible. Guards! 2 soldiers stepped forward, but Cassius backed away, his facade finally cracking completely. This is madness, he spat. You would destroy yourself for a worthless servant girl. She is nothing, nothing. She is everything, Rain said, and his voice rang with such absolute conviction that the entire hall fell silent again. She is my mate, my chosen queen, and under my protection. Any man who threatens her threatens me directly. He stepped down from the throne, pulling Ilara with him, and faced the assembled court. Let me be perfectly clear, he said, his golden eyes scanning the crowd. Lady Ilara Thornwick is innocent of any crime except surviving what was done to her. Her father was an innocent man murdered for another's greed, and anyone who questions her place at my side questions me. The hall was so quiet Ilara could hear the crackling of torches in their sconces. Now, Rain continued, turning back to Cassius, who was now held firmly between 2 guards, you have a choice. Confess your crimes publicly and spend the rest of your life in my dungeons, or continue to protest your innocence and face execution for treason. Cassius's face twisted with rage and desperation. She has bewitched you, can't you see? She's turned you against your own people. Choose, Rain said simply. For a long moment, Cassius stared at him with pure hatred. Then his shoulders sagged in defeat. I confess, he said, the words bitter as poison. Lord Thornwick was innocent. I forged the evidence. I murdered the witnesses. I destroyed his family for his lands. The confession hit Ilara like a physical blow. After 5 years of believing her father truly was a traitor, of carrying that shame like a weight around her neck, the truth felt like breaking the surface after drowning. Rain turned to face the court one final time. Justice is served, he announced. Lord Cassius will be executed at dawn for his crimes. The Thornwick name is cleared, and all lands and titles are hereby restored to Lady Ilara. He looked down at her then, his eyes soft with something that made her chest ache. My lady, he said formally, but his voice was warm as summer. "Would you do me the honour of accepting my hand?" Before the entire court, before hundreds of witnesses who had just watched her go from traitor's daughter to vindicated lady, Rain Blackthorn, Alpha King of the realm, dropped to one knee. "Marry me," he said simply. "Be my queen. Let me spend the rest of my life proving you deserve every good thing this world has to offer." Ilara stared down at him, tears streaming freely down her face, and felt something she had never felt before. Worthy. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes." When he kissed her in front of the entire court, the golden thread between them blazed like fire, and Ilara finally understood what coming home felt like. 2 days after Lord Cassius's execution, Ilara woke up in silk sheets and remembered she was no longer nobody, Lady Ilara Thornwick. The title felt foreign on her tongue, like speaking a language she had forgotten how to use. Her family's lands had been restored, her father's name cleared, and somehow she had gone from scrubbing floors to being betrothed to the Alpha King in the span of a single afternoon. The irony was not lost on her. "You're thinking too loudly," Rain's voice came from the sitting area of her chambers. He had taken to visiting her every morning, bringing breakfast and gentle conversation, just as he had when she was still a servant. Some things at least hadn't changed. "I don't know how to be a lady," Ilara said, sitting up in the massive bed that still felt too luxurious for her skin. "I've forgotten how to hold a teacup properly. I don't remember the steps to court dances. I can tell you exactly how to remove bloodstains from marble, but I have no idea how to run an estate." Rain appeared in the doorway, already dressed for the day, carrying a tray laden with pastries and fruit. His hair was still damp from bathing, and the sight of him in simple clothes, rather than royal regalia, made something warm bloom in her chest. "You'll learn," he said simply, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "We have time." "Do we?" Ilara slipped from the bed, wrapping a robe around herself. "The wedding is in 6 weeks, the coronation a week after that. Everyone expects me to transform from servant to queen overnight." "Everyone can wait," Rain said, his voice carrying that edge of command that brooked no argument. "You set the pace, not them." Ilara joined him at the table, marvelling as she had every morning at how he made everything seem so simple. Pour the tea, break the bread, sit in comfortable silence while the morning sun streamed through tall windows. Small moments that felt impossibly precious after 5 years of having nothing. "Can I tell you something?" she asked quietly. Anything." "I'm terrified that I'll disappoint you." The words came out in a rush. "That one day you'll wake up and realize you could have had a real princess, someone who knows how to be a queen, and instead you're stuck with a girl who spent 5 years emptying chamber pots." Rain reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "Do you want to know what I see when I look at you?" Ilara nodded, not trusting her voice. "I see a woman who survived 5 years of hell without losing her compassion," he said softly. "I see someone who apologizes for existing when she should be proud of every breath she takes. I see strength that most people couldn't imagine, wrapped up in gentleness that makes my chest ache." Heat crept up her neck. "Rain." "I see my mate," he continued, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. "I see the woman I want to wake up next to for the rest of my life. I see home." The last word hit her like a physical blow. Home. When was the last time anywhere had felt like home? "I don't know how to be loved," she whispered, voicing her deepest fear. "I've spent so long believing I was worthless that I don't know how to accept that someone like you could want someone like me." "Then let me teach you," Rain said, and his voice was so gentle it made tears spring to her eyes. "Let me show you every day until you believe it." "What if I don't know how to love you back the way you deserve?" "You already do," he said simply. "Every time you choose to stay instead of run, every time you let me see past those walls you've built, every time you look at me like I'm just Rain instead of a king." Ilara stared at him, something shifting deep in her chest. He was right. Somewhere along the way, without her even realizing it, the fear had been replaced by something else, something that felt like coming alive after years of merely surviving. "Show me," she said quietly. "Show you what?" "How to let you love me." Rain's eyes darkened with something that made her breath catch. Slowly, carefully, he stood and moved to her side of the table. When he held out his hand, she took it without hesitation. "First lesson," he said, pulling her gently to her feet. "You don't flinch when I touch you anymore." It was true. Somewhere in the past month, her body had learned to recognize his as safe. His touch no longer triggered her instinct to flee. "Second lesson," he continued, stepping closer until she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You look at me now instead of the floor." Also true. When had that happened? "Third lesson," he murmured, cupping her face in his hands with infinite gentleness. "You trust me not to hurt you." "Yes," she breathed, and realized she meant it completely. "And the most important lesson," Rain said, his forehead touching hers. "You choose to be here, with me, not because you have to, but because you want to." "I do want to," Ilara admitted, the words coming easier than she expected. "I want to be here. I want to be yours." "Then you already know how to be loved," he said softly. "Everything else is just details." When he kissed her, it was different from the public claiming in the throne room. This was gentle, patient, full of promise rather than possession. This was Rain loving her exactly as she was, broken pieces and all. When they broke apart, Ilara felt something she hadn't experienced in 5 years. Peace. "I have something for you," Rain said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box and held it between them. "The engagement ring?" Ilara asked, her heart racing. "Something else." He opened the box to reveal not a ring, but a delicate pendant on a golden chain. It was simple, elegant, and somehow familiar. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "The only thing of hers I have left. I want you to have it." Ilara's breath caught. "Rain, I can't. It's too precious." "You're too precious," he corrected gently. "Please, let me give this to you." She nodded, turning so he could fasten the chain around her neck. The pendant settled against her skin like it belonged there, warm and reassuring. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for staying," he replied, his arms coming around her from behind. "Thank you for letting me love you." For the first time since she was 13 years old, Ilara allowed herself to believe she deserved good things. She deserved this man, this love, this chance at happiness. "I love you too," she said, and the words felt like freedom. Behind them, the morning sun painted everything in gold, and Ilara finally understood what coming home felt like. It felt like choosing to stay when every instinct said to run. It felt like being seen and choosing to be known. It felt like rain. 3 months later, Queen Ilara Blackthorn stood on the palace balcony, watching the sunset paint the kingdom in shades of gold and crimson, and marvelled at how much a life could change. The coronation had been everything she had dreamed of as a child, and everything she had feared as an adult. Hundreds of nobles bowing before her, the ancient crown settling on her head like destiny. Rain's proud smile as she spoke the words that bound her to the realm forever. She hadn't stumbled over the vows. She had not fainted. She had stood tall and accepted what she had always been too afraid to believe she deserved. "Any regrets?" Rain's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar as coming home. Ilara turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, still wearing his formal clothes from the evening's council meeting, but with his jacket discarded and his sleeves rolled up. 3 months of marriage had only made him more beautiful to her, more precious. The way he looked at her like she hung the stars never failed to steal her breath. "About which part?" she asked, moving into his arms with an ease that still amazed her. Marrying the most stubborn, overprotective, impossibly patient man in the realm, or becoming queen of a kingdom that still whispers about the servant girl who caught their king's eye. "They don't whisper anymore," Rain said, his arms wrapping around her waist. "Not since you started the healing houses." It was true. The project to establish houses of refuge for abused women and children had been Ilara's first official act as queen, and it had silenced even her harshest critics. Who could argue with a queen who used her own experience to help others heal? "I think they're more impressed that I haven't accidentally started a war yet," Ilara said with a smile. "Give it time," Rain teased, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I have to say, threatening to have Lord Aldwyn flogged for beating his wife was quite effective diplomacy." "He deserved worse than threats." "Agreed, but watching him turn pale when my tiny, fierce queen spoke in that voice of absolute authority, that was worth the restraint." Tiny. Ilara had gained weight in the past 3 months, her body finally believing it would be fed regularly. Her cheeks had colour now, her eyes had light, and when she looked in mirrors, she sometimes saw glimpses of the girl she had been before the world tried to break her. "The servants have started a betting pool," she said, changing the subject. "Oh, about what?" "Whether you'll survive another year of my shocking ideas." Ilara grinned up at him. Apparently teaching reading to the kitchen staff was considered quite radical. "Shocking," Rain agreed solemnly. "Next you'll want to give them actual beds instead of straw pallets." "Don't tempt me." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink lower toward the horizon. This was Ilara's favourite time of day, when the formal duties were done and they could simply be Rain and Ilara instead of king and queen. "I have news," Rain said quietly. Something in his tone made Ilara look up sharply. "Good news or bad news?" "That depends on how you feel about tiny visitors in about 7 months." For a moment Ilara stared at him without understanding. Then his meaning hit her like a physical blow. "We're—" "The royal physician confirmed it this morning," Rain said gently. "You're with child." The world tilted on its axis. Ilara pressed a hand to her still flat stomach, wonder and terror warring in her chest. "I'm going to be a mother," she whispered. The most fierce, protective, loving mother any child could ask for, Rain said, with such certainty it made tears spring to her eyes. "What if I don't know how? What if I make the same mistakes?" "You won't," he interrupted gently. "Do you know how I know?" Ilara shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Because you're nothing like the people who hurt you. Because you've spent 3 months learning the names of every servant in the palace and making sure they have warm clothes for winter. Because yesterday I watched you sit with Cook's daughter for 2 hours teaching her letters when you could have been doing a dozen other things." "That's different." "No, it's not." Rain cupped her face in his hands, his golden eyes serious. "You're going to be an extraordinary mother because you know what it feels like to be powerless, and you'll never let our child feel that way." "Our child?" The word sent warmth flooding through her chest. "Are you happy?" she asked quietly. "Happy." Rain laughed, and the sound was pure joy. "Ilara, I'm so happy I don't have words for it. You've given me everything I never dared to dream of." When he kissed her, Ilara tasted promise and future and the kind of love that healed old wounds. She thought of the scared, broken girl who had scrubbed floors in these very halls and marvelled at how far that girl had come. 1 year ago today, she said when they broke apart, I was nobody. 1 year ago today I was alone, Rain countered. Look at us now. Ilara looked around the balcony, at the kingdom spread out below them, at the ring on her finger that caught the last light of sunset, at the man who had seen her when she was invisible and loved her when she believed herself unlovable. Look at us now, she agreed. The sun disappeared behind the mountains, painting the sky in deep purple and rose. Stars began to appear, tiny points of light in the gathering darkness. "Any regrets about that scared servant girl you found scrubbing floors?" Rain asked softly. Ilara considered the question seriously. The scared girl, The years of pain, the terror and self-doubt and desperate need to disappear, it had all led her here, to this moment, this man, this love that had transformed her from the inside out. Only that it took us so long to find each other, she said finally. We found each other exactly when we were supposed to, Rain said, pulling her closer. Everything before was just before. Before. The word held so much weight and so little power now. Before Rain, before love, before learning that she was worthy of good things, before understanding that sometimes broken pieces could be made into something even more beautiful than the original. I love you, Elara said, the words as easy as breathing now. I love you too, Rain replied, my queen, my mate, my everything. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient dance, and below them, their kingdom settled into peaceful sleep. Somewhere in the palace, servants who had warm beds and fair wages went about their evening tasks. Somewhere beyond the castle walls, women found safety in houses built from a queen's compassion, and in their chambers that night, when they made love with the gentle passion of two people who had found their home in each other, Elara finally understood what forever felt like. It felt like choosing love over fear every single day. It felt like being known and choosing to stay anyway. It felt like Rain's hand on her growing belly as they fell asleep planning their child's future. Forever felt like coming home.